Good day, everyone. Today we have on our agenda a story that will make you hold your breath. I'll tell you about Jacob Walker, a man whose name filled even the bravest with fear. He was not just a train robber. He was a master of his craft, a legend the underworld. And his most amazing achievement: how did he manage to escape from the police without getting caught by them? You will find out the answers to these questions in this video. Are you ready for an exciting immersion into the world of dangerous adventures? Jacob Walker was born in a small town in South Carolina. His childhood was filled with the smell of oil and the hum of engines. He grew up among the steel rails that crisscrossed the city like a web of iron. From a very early age, Jacob was drawn to railroads. His father worked as a driver on the local railway, and every time he went to work, the boy dreamed of following him. He spent hours watching the trains rush through the city and dreaming about what was inside those powerful machines. For Jacob, each train became a symbol of freedom and adventure. He dreamed of leaving his small town and going on long journeys on the endless expanses of railways. But his dreams were far from reality. Life in a small town was not easy, and the Walker family fought for every piece of bread. Jacob grew up knowing that in order to achieve his dreams, he would have to struggle and work. Despite the hardships his family faced, Jacob maintained his dreams of freedom and adventure. Every time he heard the buzz of an approaching train, the boy's heart sank with excitement. He knew that someday his dreams would come true. When Jacob came of age, he decided to leave his hometown and go in search of adventure. Trains became for him not only a means of transportation, but also the purpose of his life. He dreamed of the freedom that could only be found on the road. And so began the journey of Jacob Walker, who later became known as Iron Jack, the legendary train robber, whose name became a symbol of fear and respect in the vastness of the American West. With each passing day, Jacob immersed himself deeper and deeper into the world of railroads. He joined a gang of tramps who lived on the side of the tracks and traveled from town to town. Together with them, he traveled throughout the country, exploring different routes and learning to survive in the harsh conditions of the wild. Over time, Jacob began to notice that the railroads not only moved freight, but also a lot of money. He saw how trains transported jewelry, money, and other valuables from city to city, and realized that this was his chance to change his life. One day, when Jacob's gang stopped at a hermit on the outskirts of the city, he proposed to them a daring plan: to rob a train that was carrying valuable cargo. At first, the others were skeptical about the idea, but Jacob was persistent and persuasive. Then one day, under the cover of darkness, Jacob and his band of armed vagabonds attacked a freight train moving through the mountains. Boldly and decisively they entered the carriages, robbing everything they could get their hands on. From that moment on, Jacob Walker's life changed forever. He became known as Iron Jack, the invincible train robber who brought fear and terror to the railroads. With each successful train robbery, Jacob felt power and wealth wash over him like the mighty waves of the ocean. Money brought him not only material well-being, but also a feeling of strength and invincibility. He became the ruler of his world, dictating the rules and controlling the lives of those who stood in his way. Iron Jack was not afraid of anyone or anything. His name became a symbol of fear, and everyone who ever heard of him shuddered in horror. But with power came problems. Jacob became overly trusting, confident in his invincibility, and this gradually began to undermine his position. One day, during one of the robberies, he was ambushed by the authorities. The bandits were surrounded, and Jacob realized that his days of freedom might be numbered. But at the last moment, he came up with an idea: to use the train passengers as hostages. With a sinister smile on his face, Iron Jack ordered his men to capture all the passengers and threatened to kill them if the authorities did not agree to his terms. This move brought him not only salvation, but also a new level of power. Now he has become not just a train robber, but an insidious and merciless crime boss, owning not only money but also the lives of those who got in his way. Jacob Walker, known as Iron Jack, had his fill of petty train thefts and began to feel bored with his routine. He knew he needed something more ambitious, something that would allow him to rise above the rest of the railroad criminals. One day, meeting with his gang in an abandoned warehouse, he put forward a new plan to rob a large passenger train carrying valuable cargo. His comrades looked at him with disbelief at first, but Jacob was persistent and persuasive. They planned everything down to the smallest detail: time, place, ability to act. And that evening, with the moon shining brightly above the horizon, they headed to the tracks to carry out their ambitious plan. Jacob felt adrenaline begin to flood his blood as they approached their goal. He knew this was his chance to prove his courage and determination, and he wasn't going to miss it. And so, as the carriages rushed past them, Jacob and his gang decided to take a step that would change their lives forever. They boarded the train, ready to face whatever came their way in their quest for the greater heights of the railroad underworld. The robbery went smoothly like never before. Jacob and his gang were so coordinated that everything went according to plan without a hitch. They climbed inside the train like ghosts from the shadows, and in the blink of an eye captured the valuable cargo. When the sound of a police siren rang out in the air, Jacob's gang was already far away, at full speed towards their hideout. Jacob felt on top of the world. He managed to do what he had dreamed of for many years: to rob a large train and evade prosecution. When they reached their hideout deep in the forest, joy and euphoria took over the entire gang. They unpacked their loot, enjoying their success and sharing plans for the future. For Jacob, this robbery was not just a victory, it was a turning point in his life. Now he knew that he was capable of more than just stealing small trains. He saw himself as a leader capable of leading his gang to even greater achievements. And now, as they celebrated their success, Jacob knew this was just the beginning. His ambitions were enormous, and he was ready to do anything to achieve even greater victories in the world of crime. The robbery was not only successful, it became the most profitable in the history of Jacob's gang. When they opened the safe, they discovered an impressive amount of money, more than $2 million. It was a sum they had never even dreamed of, but now it lay before their eyes sparkling with a golden sheen. Jacob's gang acted clearly and organizedly. They cut the security wires, cracked the safe, and carried the loot into their backpacks without missing a beat. Everyone knew their role and performed it flawlessly. When the police arrived at the crime scene, Jacob's gang was already far away. They left without leaving a trace, hiding in the depths of the forest, far from the prying eyes and ears of the law. Under the cover of night, they split up, each going their own ways to minimize the risk of getting caught. The police turned out to be persistent. They tracked down one of Jacob's gang members and subjected him to harsh interrogation. He eventually broke down and told them everything he knew about the group, including plans for the future and Jacob's whereabouts. Thanks to this information, the police were able to find and arrest the rest of the gang members, except Jacob himself. He was free, but knew that he could no longer remain in place. He needed to hide until the persecution subsided. With the loot in hand, Jacob decided not to waste any time. He collected all his things and disappeared into the depths of the forest, alone with his thoughts and money. He knew that now he had a long way to evade persecution, but he was ready for it. While the police were intensively searching for him, Jacob was planning his future. He knew that this money could be his ticket to a new life, to new opportunities and the freedom that he had always dreamed of. Jacob hid in the forest for a month, struggling with hunger, fear, and uncertainty. He experienced moments when it seemed that his fate was doomed, but despite all the difficulties, he remained determined and persistent. He had to constantly change his location to avoid falling into the police's trap. Finally, when the police relaxed their search, Jacob decided it was time to leave. He packed his things and headed to the nearest city where he could find funds to move to New York. In New York, Jacob found refuge among the hustle and bustle and anonymity of the big city. He started a new life under a new name and a new past. He invested some of the money in real estate and business, trying to build a stable future for himself. But even in this crazy metropolis, Jacob could not forget his past. Memories of his days spent on the railroads always remained with him. He knew that this was only the beginning of his story, and that new challenges and adventures awaited him ahead. And so, Jacob Walker, former Iron Jack, began a new chapter of his life in the world of concrete jungles and steel cities. Arriving in New York, Jacob felt the pulse of this huge metropolis, where the money seemed larger and the ambitions endless. He realized that something more awaited him here than he could have imagined. The idea of more train robberies flashed through his mind as an opportunity to do even more. Jacob began to delve into the underground world of New York, looking for vulnerabilities in the railway transportation system, figuring out security weaknesses. He collected information, planned every step to make the robberies even more daring and profitable. From time to time, Jacob went on reconnaissance, studying train routes, schedules, and safety. He knew that every detail mattered, and he was willing to use that to his advantage. But with each new plan, Jacob began to think more and more about the consequences. He understood that the risk increased with each new robbery, but he could not refuse the thought of big money and power that it could bring him. Deciding that he could no longer rely on others, Jacob decided to take the initiative and rob the trains himself. He was afraid that the situation would repeat when one of his accomplices was caught and betrayed the whole gang, and decided not to take any more risks. He spent long nights making plans and studying train routes. He knew that he needed to be especially careful and avoid the mistakes of the past so as not to fall into the clutches of the police. One dark night, when the moon hid behind the clouds, Jacob armed himself and headed towards the railroad tracks. He waited until the train began to move. Then, with skill and determination, he climbed onto its roof. Now that he was alone with the train, Jacob felt free from all restrictions. He was willing to do whatever it took to get to his goal and get his share. With every kilometer that passed under his feet, Jacob felt his determination and confidence only increase. He was willing to take risks, willing to face danger, just to achieve his goal. Realizing that there was no need to rush and expose himself to great risks, Jacob decided to start with less. He started robbing small trains in New York to earn a little extra money without drawing too much attention to his actions. He chose routes where security was weaker and carefully planned his every move. Despite his smaller haul, each success brought him closer to his larger goal of amassing funds and expanding his influence in the world of crime. Small trains turned out to be ideal practice for Jacob. He carried out robberies with such skill and perfection that the police could not understand who was behind these crimes. For those around him, the gangster world remained a mystery, exactly as he needed. Every time Jacob returned to his refuge, he felt confident and content. He knew that each new robbery brought him closer to his goal, and he was ready to go to the end to achieve it. The police began an active search for Jacob, launching special operations and announcing a reward for his capture. But despite their best efforts, they had difficulty tracking him down. Jacob was a master of disguise and stealth. He had no close friends or connections that could give him away, and did not give in to communication with relatives. He was completely isolated from the outside world, making him even more difficult to track. While the police spent time and resources searching, Jacob continued his criminal activities, remaining invisible and unattainable. He moved around the city like a ghost, leaving behind only traces of his daring crimes. The police were desperate, but Jacob was too cunning and experienced to fall into their network. He was sure that no one could stop him on the way to his goal, and he continued to move forward no matter what. Jacob decided it was time for the most daring and ambitious robbery of his life. He decided to attack America's largest and richest train, the Golden Express. The Golden Express was a legendary train that transported valuable cargo and wealth throughout the country. Its trains were guarded like a castle, and only the most experienced bandits would think of attacking it. This train became a kind of symbol of American wealth and prosperity, and for Jacob it represented not only a huge booty, but also an opportunity to prove his strength and courage. He spent a lot of time studying the routes and schedules of the Golden Express and developing a plan of attack down to the smallest detail. He knew that this would be his most difficult and dangerous task yet, but his determination was unshakable. And so, when the Golden Express set off on its next voyage, Jacob was ready for his most daring venture yet. He prepared for battle, knowing that the stakes were high and that only the bravest could win. Intelligence. Jacob began studying the routes and schedules of the Golden Express, identifying vulnerable points for attack. Gathering information. He gained access to train plans and schedules through contacts at the local railroad agency. Preparing equipment. Jacob gathered explosives and safe-cracking weapons as well as a mask to hide his identity. Determining the point of attack. He chose a place in the open area where the train passed through a remote valley. Plan execution. As the Golden Express approached, Jacob blocked the train's path and broke into the safes. Quick disappearance. After the robbery, he disappeared into the mountains using secret trails. Splitting the loot. Jacob took all the jewelry with him and went into hiding to minimize the risk of falling into a police trap. Covering up traces. He destroyed all evidence related to the crime. Thus, Jacob Walker carried out a daring and successful robbery of the Golden Express using a carefully planned and well-executed plan of action. After the successful robbery of the Golden Express, Jacob Walker became a legend in the underworld. His daring feat got the whole country talking. The media called him Iron Jack, and his story became a hot topic for weeks. The Golden Express was the subject of the most daring and successful robbery in American history. The amount Jacob stole was estimated at more than $70 million, making this crime one of the largest and most significant in the history of the country. Despite all the efforts of the police, Jacob remained at large, and his name became associated with myths and legends. He became a symbol of freedom and defiance, and his robbery of the Golden Express entered the annals of the American underworld. For Jacob, this was not just a success, it was the achievement of his dream. He reached the top of the criminal world, stealing an amount he never dreamed of. But this was only the beginning of his path to power and wealth. His next steps were even more ambitious and dangerous. And so, the legend of Iron Jack lived on, inspiring both awe and admiration throughout the country. To many, he was a criminal, to others a hero, but no one could deny his extraordinary skill and courage. Preparing documents. Jacob began looking for opportunities to obtain a new identity and passport that would allow him to cross the border without problems. Financial preparation. He transferred some of his wealth into secure accounts abroad so that he would have financial support once he arrived. Selecting a country. Jacob researched various country options for hiding places, assessing security, contacts, and business opportunities. Route planning. He developed a travel route to avoid eavesdropping and surveillance by choosing alternative routes and means of transportation. Contacts abroad. Jacob sought connections and contacts in his chosen country that could help him settle and provide security. Preparing for departure. He collected the necessary things and funds to be ready for an early departure, leaving a minimum of traces and giving the police less time to respond. Thus, Jacob developed a careful plan to leave America and start a new life in another country, avoiding persecution and the risk of being caught. Realizing that his departure plan was complete, Jacob decided to take the last step before leaving, to say goodbye to his parents. Despite the fact that he had not communicated with them for a long time, he understood that they always remained his family, and he wanted to do something for them so that they could live without worries. Arriving at his parents' house, Jacob met them in a warm atmosphere. They were surprised by his sudden appearance but were glad to see their son. Jacob told them of his decision to leave the country and start a new life abroad, explaining that this was the only way to ensure a secure future for them. Then, barely containing his emotions, he handed them a large sum of money, $10 million, saying that this was his way of helping them. He convinced them that they would never again have to worry about money or worries. The parents were amazed by this generous gesture and deeply touched by their son's sudden display of concern. They hugged him tightly, thanking him for his kindness and promising that they would keep the money as a symbol of his love and care. Jacob continued his journey, following the plan he had carefully developed. After leaving America, he headed to one of the Asian countries, trying to start a new life in safety and avoid police persecution. He was last seen in the Chinese city. He did not attract attention, remaining invisible in the crowd. His face was hidden under a mask, and he moved through the streets as if imperceptibly merging with those around him. Jacob was careful and attentive, following his plan without a hitch. He hid from view, avoiding any suspicious actions and trying not to attract attention to himself. His main goal is to leave the country unnoticed and start a new life in a safe haven. With every step towards his goal, Jacob felt more confident. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to continue on his path in search of freedom and security. The police, despite all efforts, continued to unsuccessfully search for traces of Jacob Walker. His whereabouts remained a mystery, and from time to time, only rumors appeared about his possible stay in various parts of the world. However, every time it seemed that he had been found, Jacob disappeared like a shadow, leaving behind only traces of uncertainty. Jacob's parents were left in the dark about their son's whereabouts. Even with his last visit and generous gift, they had no information about where he was now. Their hearts were full of anxiety and hope that Jacob was alive and safe, but they could find no consolation in the uncertainty that gripped their fate. Jacob, meanwhile, continued his hidden existence, seeking to forget his past and start over with a clean slate. He carefully built his new life in the Asian country, hoping that his past would never catch up with him. Every day he became more and more wary, remains at his post, and is ready for all possible turns of fate. Thus, the story of Jacob Walker remained unfinished, and his location remained a mystery, shrouded in a veil of mystery. Time will tell what awaits him in the future, but for now, his fate remains a mystery awaiting resolution.